The Disney Lorcana World Championship is just days away and the metagame is looking as healthy as ever. So let's take a look at all of the data, all of the decks in this week's meta report. And as always, we're going to start with the meta breakdown. These are the most represented decks over the last 7 days with data provided by Inkdex. And as you can see, the distribution of decks is looking actually really good. There's no one deck that's just kind of head and shoulders above all of the others. Yes, Amethyst Steel Aggro is kind of top of the pile. I think arguably the best deck in the current format. But even so, the other decks not that far behind. It's nice to see Ruby Amethyst kind of crawling back up there. Ruby Amethyst hadn't really been in those top kind of 3 or 4 decks for a while. We know it's a deck that is very popular. I would argue one of the more accessible decks to pick up, especially if you're newer to TCGs. So it's great to see that doing super well. We also see Blurple up there as well. Inkdex is now doing a really good job of delineating the different Ruby Sapphire builds between the item build and the Burn DKP style build. Both decks still doing well, and the natural choice if you are more of a control style player. And then after that we see lots of Amethyst and Emerald. But I said at the top of the video, I think this metagame is looking very healthy indeed. And then for the tournaments we're going to be looking at in this report, the first one is the Lowlands Lore Quest at the Kolonisten Lorcana in Belgium. That was a 253 player event, so a really big event there. We're going to be looking at the Mega Illumineers Cup Saturday event that happened at Axion now. That was in the UK with 162 players, including some very well-known players there. And then also the Glass City Showdown 5K at Toledo game room in the United States, which was a 134 player event. There were also other big events this weekend. Sadly, we didn't have the top 8 data when we were recording this video, but yeah, lots of big events happening in the Lorcana space. And when it came to the top 8 breakdown for the Lowlands Lore Quest, we saw that it was Amethyst Emerald Bounce that took first place. In second place was Ruby Sapphire, and we called this one Control because it's a really interesting blend between the 2 different archetypes that Inkdex is covering. So we're going to look at that deck later on. And then third place was Emerald Steel Discard. When we look at those top 8 decks, a really good breakdown. We have 2 Amethyst Emerald, 2 Amethyst Steel, 2 Ruby Sapphire, and then 1 each of Emerald Steel and Ruby Amethyst. Next, over at the Illumineers Cup Saturday event, that event was taken down by Amethyst Steel. We had Amethyst Emerald in second place and Ruby Sapphire in third place. And then we can see from the top 8, maybe a little bit less variety there. 3 Amethyst Emerald, 3 Ruby Sapphire, then 1 Amethyst Steel and 1 Amber Steel. And then the final event, which was the Glass City Showdown 5K, taken down by Amber Steel Song. In second place, we had Emerald Steel Discard, and then third place, Ruby Sapphire. And Ruby Sapphire, the most represented deck in the top 8 here, followed by Amber Steel. And then we have 1 each of Amethyst Ruby, Amethyst Emerald, and Emerald Steel. And then one thing to notice from all 3 of these big events is that there is no Amethyst Sapphire to be seen in any of these, obviously struggling to break through into the top 8 in these events, probably because there is so much Amber Steel in the metagame at the moment, which is obviously a very bad matchup for that. And so onto the deck list. The first one we are looking at is this one from Ewart Steedman, who took the first place at that Mega Illumineers Cup on Saturday. Really big event, some really great players there, and great job to Ewan for taking this event. And with this list, which is really building on the back of all of those great Amethyst Steel lists that have been doing well the last few sets, and really, yeah, utilizing that strategy of that early game aggression, playing your 1-cost characters that will replace themselves into your Mr. Smee, who can just be questing away and making some favorable trades, and then closing out the game with things like your Genie and your Merlin Goat. So not much new to say there. The Iagos have been cut back from these lists. With so much steel in the metagame, it's just natural to get rid of those illusion characters that are weak to it. But we do still have the 3 copies of Peter Pannas, who is still a great way to take care of things like a Diablo, can take care of a Cinderella Ballroom Sensation if she sings, and can even just give your Genie some extra utility. So yeah, not much to say about this list. Still a very good, very consistent list. And yeah, great job again to Ewan for taking down this huge event. And then the deck that took down the Lowlands Lore Quest in first place, this is TSR Primo's Amethyst Emerald Temple list, and the Temple lists do seem to be the ones that performed best across these events that we're looking at. I think that's largely in part to the early game aggression. It was something that a lot of Amethyst Emerald deck lists were cutting back on, but it's nice to see things like the Cursed Merfolk being added back into this list. Even Flynn, all the way back from the first chapter, a card that hadn't really been seeing much play, but is such a great way to just put the pressure on early quickly, especially if there are slower decks. Of course, both of these cards are less good when there's a lot of steel flying around, but at least with Flynn, he's inkable, and Curse Merfolk, often even if they're banished, they will still get to quest for 2 lore, which is always going to be helping you out there. And then after that early game aggression, really it's going to be closing out the game with things like your goats. Another card that was getting cut back on, so it's nice to see it getting added back into these lists. A lot of these deck lists can kind of run out of steam toward the later parts of the game, the 15-16 lore, so the goat is going to help you guarantee some of that lore. And then of course using some of the most efficient removal in the game, the pull the lever and the wrong lever combo, just really nasty, really efficient way to remove your opponent's characters without relying on anything fancier. And because of that, cutting back on things like we don't talk about Bruno as well. So great job to Primo for taking down that event. Another tempo list doing really well is this one from Zach Crawford that took 2nd place at the Mega Illumineers Cup. And again, looking quite similar with the Merfolk and the Flynn there as your early aggression, but Zach is also including 2 copies of Rafiki. Does help make some favorable trades early on in the game, especially with things like Rhino in the metagame. He can put 1 damage on Rhino, which will then allow one of your other characters to take him down. Rafiki, again, not that great if there's a lot of steel. He's a prime target for something like Let the Storm Rage On, which is going to get your opponent a card, but you can just ink him in those cases as well. And then toward the top end of this deck list, so we do see 1 copy of Cricky, just such a good card to help swing the tempo of the game if your opponent is able to kind of set up a board that is potentially going to be challenging down your things. Cricky can come in there and help clean it up. 2 copies of Ursula, great tech card into the Amethyst Steel metagame that we're in. With so many decks wanting to sing songs, then Ursula can really help slow that down. And also beyond that, she also quests for 3 and can exert a character, which allows you to then take out some other characters as well. And of course, pull the lever, wrong lever, just super good in any deck using this in color combination. And then for those of you who prefer the more discard version of Amethyst Emerald, we have this deck list from Joe Curley, aka Spessy, who took top 4 at the Mega Illumineers Cups. So great job to him for that. And if you're curious, you can see all of Spessy's gameplay over on his YouTube channel, so it's really interesting to watch. Super fun games, and he has both players mic'd up so you can hear what's going on, which is always really nice. And this deck list really looking to set up those early game Diablos, so because of that we do see Spessy running the 10 1-cost Diablos. This is kind of a signature for him, I think, in this deck at this point. Able to then get out your Diablo as soon as you can. You've got Ursula there to protect him as well, also allowing you to scout ahead to see if your opponent has an answer to Diablo, and if they do, maybe you don't want to play him. Beyond that, Spessy's also including Ursula, Deceiver of All, a card we more closely associate with Emerald Steel discard, but Spessy is running a bunch of songs, the Sudden Chills, the Friends on the Other Side, and the Heffalumps and Woozles, all songs that Ursula can sing twice, can really swing the tempo of the game. Because of that, we also have 3 copies of the Muses, just allowing you to really combat your opponent, especially if they have a more aggressive playstyle, and we are starting to see that now, not only with Amber Steel aggro decks, but also the 2 Amethyst Emerald decks we just looked at. 4 copies of Chip, a card that I really like, inkable, makes your opponent discard and puts a body on the board. All really great things in this metagame. So great job to Spessy for putting on such a great performance at this event. Over to the Amethyst Ruby deck list, and we're looking at this one that took 4th place at the Glass City Showdown 5k from Richie Thompson, and a deck list that definitely looks like it's there to deal with all of the Amber Steel in the metagame. So we do see the Diablo as your 1-cost character, which replaces itself, which is important if it's about to get hit with a song. But we also see Minnie Mouse, always classy, making her triumphant return to the metagame. Minnie's 3 willpower does mean she survives that early game removal. We have seen decks running Palace Guard, which we'll see in the next deck list, but Minnie, another great choice because she can survive at least to Let the Storm Rage On, whereas the Palace Guard is an illusion, so would be banished. In the 2-cost slot, we see the Cusco, again another card that can replace itself, but also the Queen, another character with a lot of willpower, helping her dodge the songs. And then that's of course setting you up to be able to use things like your Merlin Crab to buff any of these characters up and challenge in the early game. And then toward more the mid game, we do have the Peter Pan Shadow Finder, which combos very nicely with the Argo. If you're able to get Iago out and rush him out, then he's likely to at least do something before he's banished, which is very important. And if he does stick around, he is just a huge body who is going to cause a lot of damage. And then more toward the mid game, so this deck list is using Maui Shark, looking to set that up as a win condition, and again such nice synergy with Peter Pan. And 2 copies of the new Hades, a card that we did write off as a 7-cost uninkable, but the fact that if you do have a character in play, then he's already getting you value as soon as he's played, and with characters with a lot of willpower on them, then they will probably survive and be good good targets to hit with your Hades. After that, we have a nice suite of ruby removal, the brawls, the dragonfires, the teeth and ambition, all different tools you can use depending on the situation. And of course, the 2 copies of Pyro Life synergizing really well with your Maui Shark as well. And then 5th place at the Lowlands Lore Quest from Team Olaf Robin, a deck list that does look quite similar but with their own take on it. So this deck using the Royal Guard instead of the minis, which, you know, I think is just personal preference at this point, what you're kind of aiming to do. And then in the 2-cost slot, the Ursula rather than the Queen of Hearts. I think I prefer the Queen of Hearts, especially if you do have things like the Teeth and Ambition, just because you can put the damage on her and then already beefs her up. Whereas Ursula is always going to have that strength, so maybe if you're not running that as a card, then it does make a lot of sense. And this play, running 2 copies of Elsa, Fierce Protector, a really cool new card that allows you to discard a card, pay 1, and then exert a chosen character, which can be really important to break stalemates and actually a really, really good ability, especially with all of the card draw that a deck list like this has. After that, we do see things like the Hades, the Maui, 2 copies of Hypnotic Strength, a great tool to deal with opposing illusions, but can also buff up some of your characters and draws you a card and synergizes with Maui. So it's just a card that's actually really well positioned in a deck list like this. And then right at the end there, one of my favorite cards from Lorcana, we do see the Queen's Castle making its way back into these lists again. This is a deck list that really wants to leverage the card advantage of Amethyst, and a card like the Queen's Castle that's both lore pressure and also card advantage pressure can definitely do really, really well. So yes, great job to Robin with this performance and this deck list. Next up, we're looking at this Emerald Steel list that took 2nd place at the Glass City Showdown 5k from Haymaker, and like many of the other decks in this metagame, building on the foundation of these decks that we know does really well already. Interesting things to note about this deck list though is that actually this player is cut back entirely on the Hypnotizers, so maybe the discard package is weakened a little bit there. They do include 2 copies of Chip, kind of as a replacement. It's kind of card advantage but in a different way because you're not drawing a card, but you are getting a character on the board, which can be really, really important. We do see 4 copies of Beast Tragic Hero in this list. I think he does better, in my opinion, when you have been able to discard your opponent's hand and you've discarded potential answers to him, but obviously he's doing really well in this list. And we do see 2 copies of Tinkerbell Giant Fairy. Actually, in both of the Emerald Steel lists we're going to be looking at today, we see Tinkerbell in those deck lists, so obviously making her way back into the metagame. And with Morph, obviously you've got a really great shift target for her there. Also 2 copies of Then Along Came Zeus, not a card you traditionally see in Emerald Steel lists, but it does help you deal with Maui Half Shark. It helps you deal with Tamatoa Happy as a Clam. So definitely lots of good targets, and it can take down a Rhino who is a nuisance in the metagame at the moment. And then Alexander Marion took 3rd place at the Lowlands Lore Quest with their version of Emerald Steel. Again, looking quite similar, but this player is choosing to include the 4 copies of Hypnotize and also 2 chips. So really a lot of the discard package there. Because of that, they're trading away things like the Along Came Zeus. We only see 2 copies of Beast Tragic Hero. So whereas the other deck list is maybe a little bit more geared toward the control aspect of removing your opponent's characters when they're on the board, this one is really removing their hand before they're able to get characters on the board, while still including a bit of the removal with things like the Tinkerbell and of course all of the songs. So great job to Alexander with this one. And before we go into the next deck list, I just want to give a huge shout out to the sponsor of today's video, HeavyPlay. HeavyPlay have their Equip Mag system, which allows you to connect your deck box to your dice box and your playmat, all with the power of magnets, which makes it super easy to switch between tables when you play. They also have their curved sleeves with curved corners, which mean you'll never have a card upside down in your deck again. If you want to get your hands on any HeavyPlay products, you can visit them at heavyplay.com and use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout to get 10% off your whole order. So thanks again to HeavyPlay for sponsoring this video, and then we're going to look at this 2nd place list from the Lowlands Lore Quest from Metin Pamuk. This is Ruby Sapphire, and this is the deck list I mentioned up front. It's kind of a cross between the item version build, so we do see things like the Tamatoa, so shiny, but also we do see the Shark in there as well. This reminds me a lot of the deck lists kind of before DKP's list fragmented a bit the Ruby Sapphire way to play it, so it's difficult to really say this this is a burn version, this is an item version, it's somewhere in between, and obviously did really well for meta in here. The one thing that definitely differentiates it from the item list is that we don't see them at the Maurice's Workshop, which is kind of the primary draw engine in those. Instead, we see the 4 copies of Chicha, a card that will let you draw a card if you ink for the second time in a turn. Because of that, we see 4 copies of the Fishbone Quill. So a card like Chicha really helping you get around the inherent card disadvantage of inking away your hand, because she will let you draw more cards. And then after that, really you're going to be building up to one of your 2 main win conditions. The first one obviously establishing that Maui half shark and then using your actions to gain lore, and then Maui to recur them. But also because we see the Tamatoa so shiny, then all of those items you have in play are going to be slowly increasing his lore, and he's also able to recur them for you as well. And we do see 1 copy of Merlin's Carpet Bag here, an item that allows you to retrieve items. So if you don't have your Tamatoa so shiny or Tamatoa happy as a clam to be able to get your items back like your popsicles, then you can do it with Maurice's Carpet Bag instead. And then the more item leaning version of the list here, this is a top 4 deck list from the Mega Illumineers Cup on the Saturday, and this is from Eric. And in this version, of course, your main win condition once more is going to be the Tamatoa so shiny and the Lucky Dime, because all of those items are really going to be building up his power and his lore. But because we're not running something like Chicha in this list, then Maurice's Workshop really becomes your primary draw engine, and because of that we have the 4 copies of Vitalosphere as well, a very efficient item in terms of cost at 1 cost, and then you can pay 1 to draw a card thanks to Maurice's Workshop. But it's also an item that has a really great utility in a deck list like this, because you can, you know, play your Scrooge McDuck for free, and then because the Vitalosphere doesn't care if it's been exerted or not, you can then banish it, pay 1 and give him Rush, which can be really important to help you control the early parts of the game, where a lot of decks could go under something like this that's a little bit slower. But I think one of the most truly fascinating things about a deck list like this is just how few characters there are. There are only 15 characters in this whole deck, which is just crazy, but you have so many ways to filter through your deck with things like Develop and Vision of the Future. You've got so many ways to draw cards that it just makes so much sense. And yeah, great job to Eric for taking down top 4. Next up, we have this deck list from Beefcake, who took 5th place at the Glass City Showdown 5K. And if, like me, you're a little bit scared of running only 15 characters, then this deck list has a few more characters available to you, but a lot of the same core here. This player choosing to only run 1 copy of Shield of Virtue rather than 2 like the previous deck list that we looked at. It is a really great card that can allow you to get kind of double duty out of lots of your characters, or just protect them, which is often a really good strategy as well. 1 copy of Maui's Fishhook, so great when you're already running those copies of Maui in the deck list already, allowing you to use it for free, but you're often going to have so much ink you can use it anyway. And again, just another great way to protect your characters, give them more strength to take down a location, or use them to take down an evasive threat on your opponent's side, and we do know there are a lot of evasives in the metagame at the moment. And 1 copy of Great Stone Dragon as well. Oftentimes you maybe don't want to be inking as much toward the later game, but if you've got something like Sapphire Coil as one of your main ways to remove characters, then it has really good synergy with the Great Stone Dragon, allowing you to ink from your discard rather than your hand while still getting the effect. So I really like that combo there. But if you prefer the more lore gaining Maui Shark version of the deck list, then it's still doing really well, as proven by Joao here, who took 8th place at the Mega Illumineers Cup, and really not looking altogether too different from the deck list we've been seeing out of Ruby Sapphire DKP versions, but including the 3 copies of Kita, which is a card I really like, a great way to gain ink advantage and also help you filter your deck to be able to find the pieces you need. But beyond that, not really too much to say, but still proving this deck does really well, and I suspect we'll be seeing a lot of this version at Worlds coming up. Next, we're going to look at Amethyst Steel, and we're looking first of all at this 1st place winning list from Alex Hansen at the Glass City Showdown, and this is Amethyst Steel songs. With the addition of Rhino this set, we know that Amethyst Steel really did get a huge power boost, both the Steel Song version and also the aggro version, and definitely doing really well here again. There are actually some really interesting things to call out in Alex's list though. A lot of Steel Song lists had been cutting back entirely on the Robin Hood package package, but Alex is running 2 of the small Robin Hood and also 3 of the big Robin Hood. If you're expecting a lot of non-ruby decks in your metagame, then Robin Hood is a really great pick because he can be very difficult for those non-ruby decks to deal with, especially steel decks can have a hard time getting Robin Hood off the board, and of course then you're going to get your card draw as well, even if they do in most cases. Alex also choosing to go with Ursula over the Troubadour. Troubadour is a card that I really like, does really well into steel matchups, but at the expense of trading away some potential card gain you could get off with Rapunzel, whereas Vanessa, not only is she difficult to remove, but she will give you the full 3 cards from Rapunzel if you're able to set that up. Alex also running 3 copies of Beast Tragic Hero. It's another interesting one, especially in a steel metagame. I didn't have a chance to watch this tournament, but I'd be very curious to go back and see if Beast was able to actually do stuff in this deck and make a difference, or whether he was just ink most of the time. It will really come down to the matchups, but there are a lot of ways to put damage on him, a lot of ways to exert him in the current metagame, so hopefully Beast did perform. Another Amber Steel song deck list that took a 6th place at the Lowlands Lore Quest here from TKT Max. And looking a little bit different from the one we just saw, no Robin Hood package in this deck list, and then going for the split of 3 Troubadours and 2 Ursulas in this list. Only 3 copies of Mr. Smee, often seen as a staple in a deck list like this, but we can see here that Max has more of the top end with the Aerial Sonic Warriors and the Cinderella Stout Hearters. So trading away some of that early aggression for more stability in the mid to late game, which honestly makes a lot of sense. Including a 1 copy of Alan Adale as an alternate win condition there to gain some extra lore when you're singing songs, which can be really important. And then 2 copies of Grab Your Sword. I think Grab Your Sword definitely works in a deck list where you have things like Aerial Sonic Warrior, because you can deal damage to everything and then do a little bit of extra damage thanks to Ariel's ability, and also works really well with Cinderella Stout Hearted because it's another song that will allow her to then challenge ready characters. So definitely a really great looking list there from Max, so great job to him. And then for the more aggro enjoyers when it comes to Amber Steel, we have this 7th place deck list from HLC Imbo Slice. And yeah, really not much to talk about in this one. We know the kind of the shell of this deck now is really, really strong, looking to get up that early game aggression and then really just flood the board toward the mid game to close it out before a lot of control decks are able to stabilize. And doing it really, really well in this current meta game. You've got ways to refill your hand, you've got the removal as well, and just a really, really solid deck. And then we also have this deck list from Colin Baker, also an aggro list, and this one also took 7th place, this time at the Mega Illumineers Cup. And really the biggest change to call out in this deck list is that Colin is actually opting to, instead of removal in the form of Calhoun to control the early game, they're instead including the Ursula Vanessa, who is then able to sing your Then Along Came Zeus. So potentially a very good strategy if you're expecting to see more of the Ruby decks, if you're expecting to see Maui Sharks and you need to get access to That Along Came Zeus. Definitely a really good choice there. Of course, you can also play Ursula Vanessa using the Lady, which means you can go for that wider board as well, and then you've set up a singer for her as well. So very good looking list there, and great job to Colin on 7th place. And then the last deck list for us today. This one is Amethyst Sapphire from Fleshy Water, I think, who took 12th place at the Lowlands Lore Quest. So I did mention at the top of the video that Sapphire Amethyst hadn't done particularly well in converting over the top 8. I think, again, just so much Amber Steel in the metagame. So many aggressive decks, even with Amethyst Emerald starting to include those really aggressive early questers. It does mean that a slower deck like Amethyst Sapphire can struggle a little bit, especially if they're not able to get to that kind of mid to late game, which is where they really want to start controlling the board. And yeah, really good list. Only 8 Uninkables in this list, so we do know that one of the great advantages of a deck list like Amethyst Sapphire is how consistent it is because of all the card drop, because of also the small number of uninkable cards. So it's definitely a deck that feels really, really great. I think it just is unfortunately a victim of the current meta game. Maybe if Ruby Sapphire becomes more popular, which can slow down the Amber Steel, then Amethyst Sapphire will be able to do better. But yeah, looks very similar to the deck list we've seen, so not really too much to say about this one. So that's it for another week of the meta report. Obviously, Worlds is just around the corner. It's going to be really, really fascinating to see which decks do well there. Of course, it's going to be its own special meta game because of the 3-deck format. But of course, we'll be very, very curious to see how it goes. If you enjoyed this video, please do be sure to give us a like and subscribe for future content. And huge shout out once more to the sponsor of today's video, Heavy Play. Remember, if you want to get your hands on any Heavy Play products, you can visit them at heavyplay.com and use that discount code Inkborn10 to get 10% off at checkout. And a final shout out to our YouTube members. Thank you so much for the support. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member, you can hit the join button down below to get all of the details. And with that said, until next time, happy questing.